which is we've got sort of a bit of a double act looking at the kind of two sides of the worlds we kind of work with. First, we've got Brooke Storer-Church from the OFS who's going to talk to us a bit about the state of the nation in HE, then Stephen Isherwood about the graduate recruiter perspective on that, and then we'll again take some questions. So
yeah, thanks, Martin. Hi, everyone. I thought, God, what a weird time it is. I think that's probably how we start most of our meetings these days. I was just, how are you doing? And are you unmuting? And do you have to leave in the middle of your meeting to sort out something for your kids? And is everybody in your team managing in this online world? And what next crisis is coming? And are we in tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3? And God, what's happening up north? And Trump, I mean, you know, what isn't there going on? 22 days, by the way, until our massive election. Yes, I have voted, and you know who it is for. I thought then today what I would do was to just take a step back and tell you a little bit about what's on the radar for the Office for Students, what we see coming, what we know is happening at a policy level, or what we anticipate is happening at a policy level, and then how that is impacting on our work as the regulator and where things might be going forward. Of course, happy to take any questions about anything I say, and I'm happy to pick up with people on the back of this more privately or on an individual level. I unfortunately won't be able to stay for the networking because I will have to go and make sure my kids eat, just those pesky things on a regular basis. So feel free to connect with me on the back of this if you want to pick up anything that I've said. So where are we then, other than in the nearly 7th month of this new pandemic way of working? We, as a regulator, paused our regulation of the higher education sector largely in March in response to the pandemic, in line with lockdown, in order to allow universities and colleges on the register to focus on what they needed to focus on, you know, providing support to their students, providing support to staff, getting their ducks in a row, and focusing on the most immediate crises on their doorsteps. Despite the fact that most of those crises have not actually resolved themselves because this pandemic is going on much longer than we anticipated it would, we are now under pressure to reboot our regulation. And so we are doing that. We are doing that in first and foremost by reconsidering the way in which we regulate quality and standards. So our main aim as the regulator is we regulate on behalf of students the quality of higher education provision and all that comes with it. We have a main priority around underrepresentation, and so a large part of the work we do is to not only ensure that all universities and colleges are providing very high quality educational programs, but that we are reducing gaps in attainment and in general providing equality of opportunity for all students who might wish to pursue higher education. And it's those two pillars really that form everything that comes from us. So it makes sense, actually. We've used this pandemic as a bit of a reflection time to ask, you know, we had to set up ourselves very quickly on the back of the legislation being passed in 2017. We developed and published our regulatory framework. From that, all of the conditions for registration have followed, and all of our regulatory activity on the back of that. But is that the best way? Are there ways we could do things slightly differently? Are there ways that we could improve what we're doing? And so up ahead, very shortly, I believe in early November currently, we're planning on publishing a consultation on quality and standards. And that will set out a bit to the sector at a very high level, some of the reconsiderations we're taking on board and seeking views about whether we're on the right path with that, whether we should be thinking about other things. That is, the intention is to follow that with a more detailed consultation early in the new year, but we're doing it in this kind of two-phased approach to seek early views. So do keep your eyes out for that, because although it may not feel directly relevant to some of the work you all do, especially those who are working in career services, actually student outcomes are a huge part of a high quality experience. I spend a lot of time arguing that in the office, and it may be that there's an opportunity for you to consider how that fits into overall our regulation of quality and standards. Of course, amidst this, we're still seeing rises in caseloads at universities as well as across the entire country. We've also had a letter from the Secretary of State out to the sector about anti-Semitism. We've had suggestions that the minister might encourage all universities to make their students self-isolate in order to get them home for Christmas. Clearly, failing to acknowledge the thousands and thousands of students that we have in our sector who do not live on campus in a boarding school-like environment, but actually live in their local communities and commute to university. We have an expectation that there'll be an FE white paper sometime in and around the budget, which we expect to come out in November. We have a sense there would be an HE strategy being published at that time as well. We have the rollout of higher technical qualifications. The first application window for the digital route is open now through December. And of course, we are expecting the potential for a revised industrial strategy in tandem with all of these other things, and potentially building on a lot of the learning that's come out of the pandemic and the calls for more consideration of green revolution and green technologies going forward and such like that. So the autumn looks to be as busy as ever, and actually to be exacerbated in busyness by the pandemic, as the government is both trying to get on with its stated priorities and commitments while also amending those and adding in new ones to address the current health crisis. This all means, of course, that so many of you, I think, are at a very important and vital position, especially those of you who work around graduate outcomes, who work to help students find employment. Because despite everything that I've just said, we know that the move on to digital learning for universities has seen career services, for example, extending much of what they did already. So many of you already provided things online, but have extended those services completely to online. And that's come with a few opportunities. We know from discussions with Elaine at AgCAS and other members of AgCAS that actually we've seen more engagement by the students least likely to undertake or seek out career services in the physical form coming into the fray digitally. So something in that has enabled some barriers to be reduced, which I think is a real success story given what we also know about digital poverty and the absence of some students because they don't have access to the right technologies. So again, it's a tale of two stories usually. But the ongoing reality is that this situation isn't going to change anytime quickly. Career services and teaching and other support services in the university are unlikely to go back to full face-to-face interactions anytime soon. And so I'm sure as we are, you are all busy learning what you can from what's working. It's a very live situation where you're grabbing lessons every day, what's working, what's not working, and trying to revise your approaches. And I think there's an amazing amount of effort that's put into that, but a lot of really, really valuable lessons that can be learned from that and shared more broadly in events like this, in your networking, in your individual communications. And it's that sort of thing that I've been trying to find out more from AgCAS, from GradCorps, from other companies active in this space, so that we can keep we ourselves at the Office for Students can be mindful of what's happening. Against that background, then, the Office for Students has decided that it does indeed need a strategic level post to lead on the skills agenda. So I say this kind of flippantly because many of you know my predecessor, Nick Turner, who was hired by my predecessor organization, HEFKE, to lead the HE role within the skills agenda in 2015. And Nick and I worked together for 5 years until she departed just earlier this year for her next exciting opportunity. And during that time, we transitioned to the Office for Students. And the Office for Students, given what I told you earlier about the quality and standards and the access and participation focus, wasn't too clear that it had a role in the skills agenda. It wasn't too clear that we should have any regulatory duties at all, because there's nothing explicit in our founding legislation around skills. Yes, graduate outcomes, and we expect that all institutions on the register deliver successful graduate outcomes, but beyond that, we said very little. Nick and I spent many months arguing that was a mistake and an oversight, given what we know is happening in the external environment, but we were unsuccessful until the pandemic. And actually, again, one of those, I wouldn't want to say bright sides, but one of the slightly positive things to come out of the pandemic experience is that it has absolutely exposed the important role that universities and colleges play in their local economies. as both providers of vital education for young and older students, for full first degrees, but also for retraining and upskilling and bite-sized courses and lifelong learning, but also as key employers with thousands of local people relying on them for their jobs, and as research and development drivers, as organizations sharing applied knowledge in a way that can help support businesses of all sorts of kinds in their local economies. And without a strong position on that at the OFS, we felt a bit on the back foot. And so the decision was taken to put that back as a strategic priority, hence my role. So what I'm doing at the moment then, and what OFS is doing, is refining what will be a skills strategy, and that will articulate the regulator's role in this space. I can't say much more about that other than we're working on it, but it is really just going to make more coherent the work we're already undertaking. So I don't see this as a revolutionary new piece of paper that the Office for Students will publish and it will suddenly rock the boat. But actually what's happened over the past 2 years as the Office for Student has rolled out its access and participation plans and its engagement with providers around its conditions of registration, we've been fairly hamstrung to say anything strong in any way about what we think about curriculum redevelopments, working with employers as partners, internships, work placements, types of employment students might find. And this is, oh, sorry, I just saw a comment post, shameless plug, and I thought, oh God, am I doing that? No, it was an irrelevant comment, but irrelevant to me, not irrelevant to the Phoenix Journal, I agree. Anyway, what this strategy is meant to do is just to make coherent the group of the package of interventions we have already undertaken. So we are already actively funding a group of university and colleges to develop AI conversion courses, to give a 1-year course to take non-AI specialists, people who have humanities degrees, and transfer them into AI specialists in under a year to address both an issue of labor market skill shortages and diversity within the workforce. We are already engaged in supporting institutions on knowledge exchange projects in the same way. We've got our local grads program, which is supporting improved outcomes for local graduates, which many of you here are actively involved in. We have active work and degree apprenticeships and higher technical qualifications and in all of these things. But the way we've gotten involved in that is really to take individual decisions about each one at a different time without a really good sense of what that means for us or where we would take further decisions. So we're working on that, and we'll share it with everyone whenever it's ready really to be shared more widely. In the meantime, we are waiting to hear about the outcomes of the spending review. We have been in discussions with several departments on their priorities, some of which are around expanding nurses in the NHS, some of which are on adult skills, retraining and upskilling, as well as some additional flexibility in adult learning loans potentially, some interests around extending a postgraduate taught bursary program, and some interested in supporting a broader push towards more flexible provision types, building on a lot of the pandemic learning. So those are some of the priorities we've been discussing with government, but as ever, we'll wait to know about the spending review outcomes to see whether or not there's appetite to continue forward on those. And in the meantime, just to finish really, just an invitation to everyone here to say that we are still actively gathering case studies on effective practice in the space of supporting students into employment. So if you have an approach you've developed, especially in the pandemic, and you have some evidence that it's working, then that's exactly the sort of thing that my team and I are interested in hearing about, because we are actively considering the ways in which we might help to raise the volume and awareness of interventions that are working within the sector in order to benefit the broader sector. So thank you all very much for your time. I hope it didn't overrun, and over to Stephen, I suppose, or Martin in transition.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Yeah, brilliant, fantastic. Thank you for such a great, comprehensive, quick summary. Stephen, over to you on the employer side.
Cool, thanks, Martin. I will show 3 very quick slides, if that's all right. I just thought it'd be graphically worthwhile showing the numbers. So I was thinking back to Paris, and when we were talking about actually what might the student recruitment market be like this year, and particularly with reference to the UK, actually the thing on our minds wasn't really so much COVID, although it was it was looking a bit bleak, was actually Brexit, and would that have an impact on numbers? And we were talking about actually that the market's been relatively stable and should remain stable, excepting economic shock, which of course we've been through. So these are UK numbers. We did do some work a little while around global numbers, and there's it's very difficult to get data globally, as you all know. So actually saying what's happened to the market overall is a bit tricky, but looking at sort of 22 other countries that people gave us some data on, I think it's fairly the same mixed bag, with some countries reporting actually relatively small drops, some talking about 30 or 40% drops in graduate numbers. So pretty much a mixed bag. But this is what's happened in the UK. And the reason I put this up there is to show that overall, yes, there has been a drop in the market. There's no disputing that. It's the non-graduate roles that have been hit harder than the graduate roles. So for us here at the ISE, that's things like apprenticeships, degree level apprenticeships, that kind of stuff. And also the SME sector has been hit harder. Glenda talked about the financial crash and learnings from those. And actually in the financial crash, the SME markets kept the overall graduate labour market buoyant, and that's not happening at the moment. Now, I think one of the dangers is the report that we put out, we called it down but not out. I think there's a really important point in that, because although we can look at the negative numbers, overall we think the market is down roughly 20 to 25%, depending on the sector. But if you flip that number around, that means over 70% of hiring actually continued as planned. And I think that's something sometimes that we all forget about, particularly students forget about as well. They tend to think the market is shut down and no recruitment is happening at all. And that can lead to a level of inactivity, a level of disenfranchisement and disengagement that we need to guard against. So I will say that it's actually not as bad as some of those numbers may think. I'll come back onto the interns and placement bits a little bit later, because I think those drop numbers are deceptive. We've got another piece of work out in the field at the moment. This is the data that we produced back in end of May, but it paints broadly the same picture, I would say, that I hear from employers at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, as you'd expect. Again, as Glenda said, what happened earlier in the year is companies just stopped recruiting. So unless it was a business that was significantly impacted by COVID, so travel industry, leisure industry, some of those employers that we work with, they did have to cut their graduate program. So even of the offers they made, they had to rescind for pretty obvious reasons. If you're not running trains at all, how can you bring anybody into your recruiting program? But what most employers do is they stopped hiring, which is also part of the reason I think the non-graduate hires were hit a bit harder, the apprentice programs, because they tend to be a little bit later in the cycle. But what employers are telling us at the moment, with so much uncertainty about how long the recession is going to last and how long it's going to be before an upturn, there's a real hesitancy in committing to hiring numbers. So what we found is employers have been going to market just a little bit later, and they're going in a more sporadic fashion. So some of them are holding back vacancies till the new year. Some of them, if you think of some employers have got a broad offering, let's take your average professional services firm. They're recruiting trainee accountants, trainee tax consultants, trainee management consultants, risk analysts, and all those different businesses will have a different landscape that they're trying to resource. So it is going to be a very bitter year and lots of uncertainty, I think. So I think we're going to see a lot more sporadic recruitment. If you flip on the positive side, if we do get a vaccine relatively quickly, and what we did see this summer, particularly in the UK, is when lockdown did ease, the economy did bounce back pretty quickly. And again, if we look back at previous recessions, I've got grey hairs to have worked through a few. When that market bounces back, all of a sudden, some of that suppressed demand from resourcing managers, all of a sudden they want to hire people and they want to hire them quickly. Which gives real problems for recruiters, because having to find candidates, sort of late in the season. So we might see some of that next year here, I think. But there's other numbers in there. You know, a lot of employers we talk to are planning to recruit about the same numbers that they hired this year and last year. A small percentage are actually saying they'll be recruiting more. And of course, there are those that will be recruiting less. The last slide I wanted to show you, and then I'll stop sharing, is this one. Again, the detail on the numbers isn't quite so important. But funny enough, I was talking about Brexit when I kicked off. We produced this data really just to think about what the impact of Brexit would be and show actually how in the long run the graduate market is relatively stable. So if you look back at the 2007 peak, that was the real high point in the graduate market. And what you see happened after that, there was the 2008 year when there was the most significant drop. But actually 2009 was when there was even fewer vacancies. And I think there was a danger that that happens next year. Because if you think about those employers that stuck with their hiring numbers for this year, you know, they stayed true to the offers they made. They might well have recruited enough people to see them through a couple of years of an intake. And if the economy does stay in a tough situation well into next year, that might suppress hiring even more next year. So I wouldn't be surprised if next year overall numbers do take a little bit of a dip again, which when we think about students, that actually creates a bigger problem. Because if you think about next September in the UK, you know, when people would typically be joining their graduate type programs, you will have the graduates of next year, you'll have the graduates of this year who didn't get a job, and you'll also have those who chose to do a one-year master's program popping out into the labour market. So I don't think we should think that even if the economy bounces back and vacancies do start to come back quite quickly, it'll be a particularly easy year. So that was just some of the data slides I wanted to talk about. I think the one thing, and I've said this before, we have to be really careful, is that we guard against thinking about the labour market as a whole. Not only are different sectors affected differently. So if I think about, you know, some of those specialist programs into the public sector, you know, the police force programs, prison service programs that we've got running in the UK, you know, they are recruiting the same numbers as they ever were, if not slightly more. You know, we have FDM who sponsored this; they're still recruiting at the moment. You know, there's lots of organisations out there that still very much both see an immediate need to hire graduates, but are also thinking about 3 years down the line. You know, from my own experience, I used to run grad recruitment at EY before I took this job. You've got to have people qualifying as accountants all the time. So if you don't recruit any trainee accountants this year, in 3 years' time, when we probably will be in recovery stage, you don't have enough people coming off programs and they don't exist in the external market, and that really affects your ability to deliver and win work. So quite a lot of the employers we work with do, you know, they've got very real and immediate problems to deal with at the moment, but actually they are thinking, actually, how do we get the balance right for that 2 or 3 years down the line? So we are seeing lots of employers recruiting, and what employers, of course, aren't doing is going out on campus. If you go to our website, you'll see lots of webinars and podcasts and stuff around actually how do employers deal with a virtual autumn. So that's things like virtual careers fairs, virtual presentations, virtual skill sessions, all that kind of stuff. But I guess the biggest change has been to virtual recruitment. And I know, Martin, you and your business do some of this as part of your service offering. So those employers that were still recruiting when lockdown happened, they had to switch very, very quickly. So there was some immediate, quick wins, quick decisions made in terms of how you use things like Zoom platforms, you know, shift assessment centre exercises online. And I think we've got to the stage now where a bit more considered approach is being taken, because employers have had a bit longer to think about it. Video interviews have been around for a long time in the recruitment market, both at an experienced high level and a graduate level. So what we've seen is just an even bigger increase of that kind of technology. But the big change is this virtual assessment piece where employers have learned how to do things like group exercises, case studies, role play in a virtual environment. So there's a lot of that stuff going on. I mentioned in terms of placement on the earlier slide, because although the numbers look quite stark in that they've fallen quite heavily, if we go back to the time when lockdown happened, actually employers were thinking about their their spring break programs, getting people in over the Easter period. Of course, those had to, they really did stop dead. And of course, all those summer programs, nice shiny offices, getting lots of fresh-faced interns into those buildings. Of course, that didn't happen. But that didn't mean that employers turned their back on that market. A lot of the employers we work with offered some form of virtual experience. A very small number. And actually, we put this case study in a briefing document the OFS put out. Actually, Aon, they managed to deliver an 8-week virtual internship program. IBM, their 12-month placement program is really integral to the way that a lot of their business units operate. They found a way to bring those students in, induct them virtually, deliver laptops, and get them up and running. But for most employers where that wasn't possible, they were able to offer something else. So that might have been, 2 or 3 days of online skills training. It might have been a bit longer by incorporating a virtual projects, that kind of activities. And we've seen lots of employers think about ways of offering different types of experiences to students, because they are aware of both the need to keep an employer brand, because once you pull your employer brand out of the graduate market, it takes a lot of time and resources to build it back up. But also those that are hiring, intern programs, deliver organisations some of their best hires. So really keen to keep that going. So I think we'll see a lot more of that activity through the year, and a lot more innovation in that kind of space as well. So I mentioned online recruitment, I mentioned the virtual autumns, I mentioned internal internships and placements. So what does that mean for the future? Well, again, it's quite interesting going back to the financial crash, because when you get, a shock like this that causes a change to working practices, yes, the pendulum will swing back. But I think the big question is how far it swings back. And one of the big changes that happened around the financial crash was in the way that organisations used digital technology, to market their applications and build their employer brands. And actually, a lot of resources came out of the recruitment advertising industry and went in-house and affected that side of the market. My personal prediction, although I do hesitate to predict too far into the future, because we all know our predictions that go wrong. But actually, I think at the bottom line is doing recruitment online is cheaper, and it is less resource intensive. Yes, it takes a lot of effort to get the systems up and running and get them running right. It's not an easy transition to make, but you haven't got to worry about, booking out floors of meeting rooms to run group exercises. You haven't got to get, sort of people from the business off their clients and into the offices doing interviews and assessment exercises. You haven't got to get candidates to travel. So there's a whole bunch of operational costs in there and opportunity costs that will be saved. So I won't be surprised is when we look sort of 12 months, 24 months down the line, is some of those things that employers have learned to do online will stay online. So I won't be surprised if a lot of assessment centre exercises stay online, and maybe actually the final stage would be possibly a group exercise, and a final interview in the office, something like that. So I think we should prepare for, actually, when we do shift back, some of this stuff will most definitely stick. But I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that develops. But for now, everything is virtual. As I said, the employers we talk to are still active in the student markets. They want to talk to students, but they're just not necessarily going on campus to do it. I think that was everything I wanted to cover, Martin. So back to you for any questions.
Thanks, Stephen. Fantastic. And thanks, Brooke, as well, for those great summaries. So I've got a couple of questions that have come in direct on chat, but obviously, again, I'll sort of keep my eye out as best I can for either virtual or real hands up as well. But just the first question would be Stephen, a few people have been talking about maybe a kind of mid-year surge in graduate hiring, so maybe around Jan-Feb, when rather than the kind of traditional sort of timeline. Do you sort of set any store by that? Do you think that's likely? Or?
Yes, I do. The reason I'm slightly hesitant, because we're just in so much uncertain territory around COVID. And it will all depend on employers' confidence in the economy bouncing back. It's funny, graduate recruitment can be an early indicator, because actually when employers see their order books start to fill up, they'll start hiring to meet that demand before the numbers kind of hit the P&Ls and hit the markets. So as soon as employers get that confidence, they will start, increasing their hiring to meet that. But that confidence has got to be there. And I do know some of employers who have delayed their openings. They might be typically opening around that October time, going onto campus, and they go, right, do you know what, we'll just hold off and we'll plan to open vacancies in January, or doing a stage approach. So my instinct tells me yes, there will. Or it might be later than January. I do remember in my previous role, some business units coming along in June and saying, right, we need 20 graduates, we need them to start in September. And you're like, oh, bloody hell, really? Because they're always hard to find. I'm sure you've had those requests as a business in the past, Martin.
We have.
Yeah. So my personal prediction is there will be some of that, but it all depends on how quickly business confidence returns.
Any questions out there? Any hands up for either Brooke or Stephen? Femi, I see your hand going up there. You unmute and fire away.
Okay, I was typing it, but I was going to ask Stephen whether he felt that any of these digital recruitment methods would be advantageous to the more disadvantaged student groups, or disadvantaged people looking for employment.
Yeah, I think it could be a mixed bag. On the positive side, actually, and I know this from talking to employers, they see this as a great opportunity to actually reach a much broader level of institutions. Because one of the constraints around how many institutions an employer goes to and the pools of students is driven by resources. If you only got so many resources to deliver, let's say, stuff on campus at 10 or 15 universities, that's going to limit how many you go to. In a virtual space, actually, a lot of those constraints go away. And especially those kind of platforms that are out there that are driven by third-party suppliers, again, they can be institution blind. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. I think the challenge is that actually, we talked about things like digital poverty in the past, who's got the best, or just usable broadband access, that kind of stuff, that could get in the way. And again, that kind of peer support, parental support, actually, just basically, chivvying their kids, although I hesitate to use that word kids alongside, you should do this, here's how it might work, or actually trying to point their kids to somewhere where they know there's vacancies. I think some of that stuff could be on the negative side. And I do talk to employees who are worried about the volumes of applications they're going to get. Just that sheer force of numbers, is that going to, in a sense, drive employers who are short of resources actually to take some of those shortcuts we know that aren't great in graduate recruitment. I know some employers who are actively trying to guard against that, because that will be the reality. Employers are going to get a lot more applications they're used to dealing with. And just as teams within university are under cost pressures, employer teams are also under cost pressures. They're also having their budgets slashed. They've got positions they can't hire again. So they're, that phrase, trying to do more with less. So I think we need to keep banging the drum, Femi. You and I have spoken about this. We've got to keep this on the agenda and make sure employers don't take some of those easy cheap cuts and shortcuts, I should say, and cheap and shortcuts. And make sure that they're factoring a lot of their thinking into how they can make their programs fair and accessible to all, and actually see this as an opportunity to improve on stuff they've done in the past.
Great. I've got a question coming for both of you from Joe Weldon, and about skills and graduate attributes. So obviously, Brooke, you were talking about the skill strategy the OFS looking at. Stephen, you're listening and talking to employers all the time. And obviously we heard from Glenda earlier about maybe this emergent or evolving set of skills that are going to be important to people. What do you see as the kind of changing skills needs or are there changing skills needs, or are actually the skills needs just the same, just people need to work at home rather than in an office? And how are you both respectively thinking, either universities or employers might address that?
Shall I jump in, Stephen? The extent to which OFS will take a position on this is still unclear to me. But it is recognized at the Office for Students in reflection of what's recognized in the sector, that we are interested in what's often considered two sets of skills, but would be hopefully housed effectively in one individual. And those are subject-specific skills where they are necessary, you know, for chemists, nurses, therapeutic radiographers, for example. But then what was called by our first speaker, which I really liked, are transversal skills, what often is called soft skills, or what we might think of as transferable skills. And I think within that, we all know those are necessary. Increasingly, we've talked about the fact that for a graduate to be, you know, successful and competitive in today's labor market, or even maybe the labor market of 2 years ago, they need to be increasingly adaptable. The pandemic has only exacerbated this and maybe made things more immediate. So I don't see that it's introducing any new skills, but it is underlining the importance and making more front and center the need for all of us, you know, regardless of whether we're first degree graduates or whether we've come into higher education to take an HND, or whether we're coming back to take a short course as mature learners, or whether we're just having a, you know, something at a lower level. Anyone seeking education and looking to come into the labor market now needs to have resilience, needs to be adaptable, needs to be changing and changeable. I think it's quite an old concept that we might train for a role, and then that role will be well defined and rooted in its expectations. We've seen enough signals around us with technological advancement and the changing trends around greater needs for higher level skilled jobs and the reduction of lower skilled jobs going forward to know that. But like I say, with the pandemic, we now have immediate and very kind of forceful technological change. We're all having to work from home in new ways, and not only get used to the technology, but get used to the distractions, get used to the balancing of a lot of different draws on our attention, because many of us are not just replicating the perfect office environment at home. And again, all of that speaks to, you know, someone who's much more adaptable than maybe we would have thought about it, or certainly some of my colleagues are, who prefer to have a very separate work and life balance. So those are my thoughts. And like I say, these are the thoughts that I'll be feeding through, and whether we can incorporate those into our regulatory approach to the office, or whether we deal with those in a softer way as a regulator, i.e. through networking events and through speaking platforms like myself, is still to be determined. Steve, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Brooke said. And I think it's a little bit early to say, right, you know, employers are going to radically look at some different skill sets because of everything shifting online or the changing nature of work. I think actually, I don't necessarily see that coming. I think it will reinforce what employers are looking at already. But what I think that we might see a bit of a shift in emphasis, so a bit of more of a gradual emphasis on a few things. Brooke, you mentioned that word resilience, and that really came through, to my mind, in the financial crash. Employers started looking at this word resilience, and can they assess for it? Can they spot people who have better resilience than others? And I mean, that's a whole other tangent we could go down. But I think, you know, I think that will then and it never went away after the financial crash, but I think that will tick up again over the next 12 months. And that ability to work independently, again, employers have, in this particular